everyone, today's video is sponsored by Skylum and we're going to be editing this photo in Luminar Neo and also checking out the new plugin for Neo, which is called Noiseless AI. So I thought I'd use this photo to share with you a very simple 5-step process that you can use to edit any kind of photo. So these 5 steps will work whether you're editing a self-portrait astrophotography shot, whether it's an indoor photo, a landscape photo, a portrait. So let's dive into it. I thought this would be the perfect photo to test out the Noiseless AI plugin because I shot this with quite a high ISO. I also have a bunch of other examples that we'll be testing the plugin with as well, some with like super extreme noise, some with a little bit more subtle noise, and we'll have some comparisons to look at as well. But first, let's do the editing. So the first thing I do with any photo is I adjust the exposure. So we're going to go into develop, and here I want to increase the exposure because this image is quite dark. We also have quite a lot of shadows in the top and the bottom half of the photo. So to fix that up a little bit, I'm going to increase the shadows. And that's just going to balance the lighting in the entire image. I'm also going to decrease the highlights a little bit as well. So step 1 is super easy. It's just to balance out the tones of the photo. Step 2, I like to add some style to the tones of my photo, and to do that, I use the tonal curve. So heading here, I always like to do an S shape to my curve, and depending how much of an S shape you do, you can add a lot of contrast or you can create a bit more of a film look. So to do that, I'm going to put a point in the shadows and just bring that up. And then I'll put a point here in the blacks area and bring that down. I'll also add a point to the midtones just here in the middle, and also a point in the highlights as well, and just bring that up slightly. So if you bring up your black point quite high, it's going to create that very matte black film-like look to the colors, which I usually like doing. But since this is a very dark looking image, I feel like it looks a bit overwhelming. So I'm actually going to tone that down a bit, and I prefer to have more contrast in this image. So I'm just going to create a little more of like a tighter S curve to add that contrast and that punch to this photo. And once you have your main points down in your tone curve, you can adjust them little by little until you're happy with what the final image looks like. With step 3, we're going to start adjusting the colors of our photos. So we're going to start doing that with HSL, which is hue, saturation, and luminance. So looking at this photo, we have 2 main colors that we're going to be working with. We have the blue of the sky, and then in the foreground we have that greeny orange bushland, which is like kind of half and half in color. So that's kind of bothering me a little bit. So I want it to either be lush green or burnt orange. So to do that, I'm going to go into hue and select my yellow slider. If we move it to the right, it will make the grass appear more green, which I feel like doesn't really work for this image because then we have too many cool colors. And I think the contrast between the blue sky and then like the warm grass in the foreground will make it look much more interesting. So I'm going to move the yellow slider just here to the left and just make that grass appear more brown and orange. I think that looks really cool. We also have the blue of the sky. So if I bring the blue hue slider to the right, it's going to make that sky appear more bluish, purple, navy colored. Whereas if I bring it to the left, I kind of like how it makes the blue appear a bit more cyan. It's got a little bit like a sci-fi look, so I like that shift in hue of the blues, so I'm going to keep it there. The next thing I'm going to go is into luminance, which adjusts how bright or dark the colors appear in a photo. I really want the stars and the clouds to stand out in the sky, so I'm going to decrease the luminance of blues to make the sky look darker. And I also want to increase the yellow and green luminance just to make that grass in the foreground stand out a little bit more. Last but not least, we're going to go into saturation, and again I'm focusing on the yellow, green, and blue sliders because those are the main colors that we have in our photo. And I want to increase all of them because I do feel like this photo looks a little bit desaturated. So I'm going to bring up the yellow slider and the green slider a little bit, and I'm also going to bring up the blue slider quite a lot. So here's a before and after of step 3, which is to adjust our colors with HSL. We have our before and our HSL adjustments. With step 4, we're going to make more color adjustments, but this time we're going to be adding our own personal style to the color by using split toning. So under the toning tab here, we're going to start off with the highlights, and I'm going to increase the saturation so we can really see what we're doing. and then change the hue to add a solid color to the highlights of our photo. The clouds that you're seeing in the image is actually smoke from some hazard reduction backburning that they were doing during the summer. So it does have a little bit of a gray, almost reddish color to it. So to counter that, I want to add more of a blue hue to the clouds instead, like a little bit of a cyan color, just to make it look like actual clouds. I'm going to decrease the saturation to make it blend into the photo. So I like what that looks like. Next, we're going to go into shadows. Since I made the grass in the foreground so orange, I'm going to play into that a little bit more as well. And I'm going to add a bit of an orange color to the shadows of our photo. So just here is nice. And I want to increase the saturation until I can really see it in the image. So here's a before and after of our toning. As you can see, the shadows color, the orange color, is bleeding into the top half of the sky a little bit too much for my liking. I really love what it looks like in the bottom half, but in the top half, I prefer it to be that cool blue color instead. So I'm gonna go into masking here and select brush and go to erase. And I'm gonna decrease the softness and strength and just make the size of the brush quite big. And then just erase our split toning from the top half of the image. So as you can see, with those 4 steps, we were able to create a very natural, clean, but beautiful looking edit for our photos. So here's the before. This was the original photo with no edits, and this is the after. So step 1 is to create our tonal adjustment. Step 2 is for creative tonal adjustments. Step 3 is for HSL, and step 4 is for creative color adjustments with toning. The final step, step 5, is actually very image specific and is to add that final touch to finalize the image. Whether that means cropping your image or straightening the horizon line, erasing something that's distracting, or in this case, I really want to clean up the noise in this image because I shot it with quite a high ISO. So this photo, I took it with a 1-second exposure, an aperture of f1.8, and my ISO was at 6400. So when I zoom in, you'll be able to see a lot of noise in the photo. So I'm gonna head here to the Noiseless AI extension, and I like here how it suggests which one to use. So since this is a very high ISO image, it's suggesting for me to select the high adjustment. So I'm gonna select that and let it analyze the image. Okay, so here's what it's done. Here is the original photo with the noise, and here is the after with just the automatic noise reduction. And I think it's done a really good job because the sky looks a lot smoother, but you can still see all the detail in Dan and I and the rocks and all that stuff. So here's the before and after. And if you want to take more control over the way the noise reduction is applied, you can use these sliders. So maybe you don't want as much noise reduction, you don't mind having a little bit of noise in your photo, or you want to see more detail from the original image, you can use these sliders to adjust that. So that is what it looks like with the Noiseless AI plugin. I also want to compare this image by using just the original denoise that comes with Luminar Neo. So I'm going to increase the luminosity, color, and increase denoise quite a lot as well, just to see what it does. And as you can see, it doesn't really preserve any of the details. So Dan and I just kind of get really blurred out in the image. So I do like how the Noiseless AI extension retains that detail, but also makes the rest of the image look a little bit smoother by removing the noise. As promised, I have some real world examples of different photos, different cameras, different ISO settings, different lighting that we're going to use to test out the Noiseless AI extension. So the photo that we were just editing, I took on the Sony a7 III at ISO 6400. The next photo I have was taken on the Sony a7 IV at ISO 800. So we'll head to edit and zoom in to 100%, head to noiseless raw. And then as you can see here, it's suggesting that I use the low setting for the noise reduction because it can tell that I'm not using a very high ISO and there's not as much noise in this photo. So I'm gonna select low and let it do its thing. And in the original photo, Dan does have a little bit of motion blur already, so it's not gonna be like super tack sharp on his eyes, so just keep that in mind. But here is the before and after. It's cleaned it up really nicely. Next, we have a photo taken on the a7R IV, also at ISO 800. So I'm gonna zoom into 100% on this image, go to noiseless raw. Again, it's suggesting that we use low because there isn't too much noise in this photo, so I'm going to select that. I'm also not going to cut this one out so I can show you exactly how long it takes in real time. And a question I get asked a lot is what I'm using to edit with Luminar Neo. So there we go, it's all done. And I'm using a 14-inch M1 MacBook Pro for this video. So there's the before and after. For this one, I feel like we could use a little bit of extra detail and sharpness, just so her face stands out in the photo a little bit more. So I think that we don't lose any detail when we look at the before and after, we just lose the noise, which I really like. The next photo we have is with the Sony a7 IV, and we are at ISO 4000 with indoor tungsten lighting for this photo. So when we zoom in, you can see there is quite a lot of fine noise in this image, and it is suggesting for us to use the middle adjustment. So here's a before and after. I'm also just going to zoom out a little bit so we can see more of the texture on my face. So I want to just, again, like the last image, just bring back a little bit more detail and sharpness. So we still have all the details around my eyes and on my skin texture as well. So here's the before and after. Again, I really love how it reduces the noise while still maintaining detail and texture, especially when it comes to portraits, because there's so many little details and stuff that you want to keep in a photo from someone's face. The final photo I have is super extreme. This was taken on the Sony a7S III at ISO 64,000. I wouldn't normally shoot with an ISO this high. This was just a shot for fun, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what Noiseless AI can do. So let's head to edit. We're gonna zoom in, and of course it's suggesting for us to use high, so definitely gonna do that. Whoa, okay, that's pretty good. And so before and after. So I'm gonna adjust the settings a little bit. I think we need a little more color noise reduction and add a bit of extra sharpness too. That's done a really good job. So I'll show you again at 50% so we can see more of the details of the image. Before and after. That's done a really good job at cleaning that up at a ridiculously high ISO. So that is all I have for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed my easy 5-step process for when it comes to editing photos. You can use this process to edit literally any style of photo to create very natural, minimal, clean looking edits. And if you want to try out Luminar Neo and the Noiseless AI extension, please use the link in my description to check it out and try it for yourself. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I will see you all next time. Bye.